Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The acid rain hissed against General Carson Drave's combat helmet as he crouched behind a shattered concrete barrier. Flashes of artillery fire illuminated the night sky in brief, violent bursts, revealing the outline of what had once been a thriving outpost, now reduced to smoking ruins. 8 years of bitter border conflicts had led to this moment, a desperate assault on one of the enemy's most fortified positions. "Delta Squad, report," Drave growled into his comm unit, his voice rough from hours of shouting commands through the acrid smoke. "Eastern Quadrant secure, General." The response crackled through static. "Heavy casualties, but we've breached their command center." Drave nodded to himself, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle deeper into his shoulders. Each life lost under his command was another name he would carry. At 43, his once black hair was now streaked with gray, his face weathered by both the harsh alien atmosphere and the burden of leadership. "Sweep for survivors," he ordered, rising to his feet. "Execute Protocol 7. Protocol 7. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. No prisoners, no mercy. The High Command had been explicit. This species was too dangerous to be captured. Their biology, their psychology, too alien, too unpredictable. But 8 years of war had taught Drave that the enemy was far more like his own people than anyone cared to admit. They fought for territory, for resources, for survival, just as humans did. He moved cautiously through the devastated compound, stepping over debris and bodies alike. The eeriness of the aftermath always struck him. How quickly a battlefield could shift from chaos to silence, from screams and explosions to nothing but the soft patter of toxic rain. His squad had done their job with brutal efficiency. The outpost was neutralized, its defenders scattered or dead. As he rounded a corner into what appeared to be a former communications hub, movement caught his eye. A slight shift among the shadows. Drave raised his pulse rifle in one fluid motion, targeting systems locking onto a figure half buried under collapsed ceiling panels. Blue skin, combat armor, a sealed face mask with a reflective visor concealing the face beneath. One of their elite snipers, judging by the insignia and the long-range weapon clutched in a three-fingered hand. Female, if their species' sexual dimorphism translated as intelligence suggested. She was badly wounded. Dark indigo blood seeped from multiple injuries, pooling beneath her slender form. Yet she made no sound. No pleas, no threats, not even sounds of pain. She simply watched him through that inscrutable visor, utterly still save for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Protocol 7 echoed in his mind. Execute on sight. His finger tensed on the trigger, a motion he'd performed countless times before. Quick, clean, merciful at least, compared to leaving her to a slow death from her wounds. But something stopped him. Something in her posture, not defiance, not fear, but a strange acceptance, almost expectation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, as if she knew him. "General," a voice called from outside. "Area secure. Demolition charges set for 30 minutes. "Acknowledged," Drave responded, never taking his eyes off the wounded sniper. "I've found a survivor. I'll handle it personally." He approached cautiously, rifle still trained on her vital points. "Can you understand me?" he asked, knowing the translation implants were standard issue for both sides by now. No response. Just that steady, silent gaze that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "I'm taking you in for interrogation," he said, more to himself than to her. It was a violation of orders, but something about this encounter felt important, significant in ways he couldn't articulate. She made no move to resist as he secured her weapons and checked her wounds. Multiple shrapnel injuries, a plasma burn across her left side, possible internal damage. She should have been unconscious or at least vocally expressing pain. Instead, that unnerving silence continued. Drave activated his field med kit, administering basic treatment to stabilize her. "I don't know if you can understand why I'm doing this," he said as he worked, "but I want answers, not another corpse." The building shuddered suddenly as a series of explosions rocked the eastern perimeter. Secondary detonations. The enemy had rigged their own failsafes. "General!" The panicked voice of his lieutenant cut through the comm. "They've triggered their self-destruct sequence. The whole compound is going critical." Drave cursed, abandoning the treatment as he reached for his rifle. In that split second of distraction, he expected the wounded sniper to make some move, to attack, to flee. Instead, as the ceiling above them began to collapse, she moved with startling speed, not away from him, but toward him. Before Drave could react, she had thrown herself over his body, her armored form shielding him as tons of concrete and metal came crashing down. The world went dark. Pain was his first sensation upon waking. Dull, throbbing pain across his back and shoulders, but nothing fatal. His second sensation was confusion. He should be dead. The blast had been directly overhead. No human could have survived that without protection. Protection? Memory flooded back. Blue skin, reflective visor, a body covering his own. Drave forced his eyes open, finding himself in a small pocket of space within the rubble. Emergency lights from his armor cast everything in a harsh red glow, and there, half underneath him, lay the alien sniper. Her armor was crushed, visor cracked, indigo blood flowing freely now from fresh wounds. She had saved him, used her own body as a shield. "Why?" he croaked, his voice hoarse from dust and smoke. Her only response was a slight tilt of her head, that same inscrutable gaze through the damaged visor. There was purpose in that gaze, not just protection, but something deeper, something personal. "General Drave," distant voices called, accompanied by the sound of shifting debris. "Can you hear us, sir?" "Here," he shouted back, never taking his eyes off the alien. "I need a medical team. Priority 1? Within minutes, his soldiers had cleared enough rubble to extract them. Drave refused assistance, his attention fixed on the medical team, now working frantically on the alien sniper. Lieutenant Kess approached, concern evident on his face. "Sir, you need medical attention." "See to her first," Drave insisted. "Her?" Kess glanced at the alien with poorly disguised revulsion. "Sir, Protocol 7 is suspended," Drave snapped. "This prisoner saved my life. That earns her medical treatment and a proper interrogation." The soldiers exchanged confused looks. Several of them had gathered nearby, watching the scene with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "She's one of them, sir," a sergeant said, stating what everyone was thinking. "The same species that hit us at Morgan's Ridge last month. That took out half of Delta Company." "I'm aware of who she is, Sergeant," Drave replied coldly. "Then why not just follow protocol?" another soldier muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Put her down and be done with it." Drave turned to face his troops, suddenly aware that his decisions in this moment would ripple beyond this single alien's fate. "Because sometimes," he said, his voice carrying across the rubble-strewn clearing, "we need to remember what we're fighting for. If we exterminate an enemy who has shown mercy, who has saved one of our own, what does that make us?" Silence greeted his words, but he could see the impact in their faces. Confusion, uncertainty, perhaps the first seeds of doubt about the narratives they'd all been fed about this war. "Get her stabilized for transport," Drave ordered the medical team, "and treat her with the same care you'd give any of our wounded." "That's a direct order." As the soldiers dispersed, Kess remained at Drave's side. "This is going to raise questions at command," he warned quietly. "Let it," Drave replied. "Maybe it's time we all started asking some questions." "Sir, you should get checked out too," a medic suggested, eyeing the general's battered form. Drave nodded absently, following the stretcher to the transport ship. As he walked, fragments of past battles flickered through his mind. 8 years of warfare, hundreds of engagements, and somehow he had survived them all, often without a scratch, even when those around him fell. Lucky, they called him. Blessed, the unkillable General Drave, who walked through gunfire untouched. But what if it wasn't luck? 3 days later, Drave stood in the observation room of the military hospital, watching through one-way glass as medical staff tended to the alien prisoner. She had undergone multiple surgeries. Her condition finally stabilized, though she remained unconscious. "Tell me again," he said to the doctor beside him, "about the previous injuries." The doctor, a serious woman with prematurely gray hair, consulted her tablet. "As I mentioned yesterday, General, her body shows evidence of extensive previous trauma. Healed plasma burns across 40% of her body. Multiple bullet and shrapnel wounds. 3 poorly set fractures. Some injuries appear to be as old as 7 years, others as recent as a few months." 7 years. Almost the entire duration of the war. And the modifications? Extensive, the doctor confirmed. Enhanced musculature, reinforced skeletal structure, accelerated healing capabilities. All black market work, not standard military issue for their forces. Someone wanted her to be very hard to kill, or someone wanted her to be able to keep fighting despite repeated injuries, Drave thought. What about her record? Any identification? Nothing conclusive, said the intelligence officer who had joined them. Her armor has insignia consistent with their special forces, but the serial numbers don't match any of our known enemy combatants. Fingerprints, DNA, retinal scans, all negative matches in our database. A ghost, Drave murmured. The intelligence officer nodded. What's particularly strange is that we found remnants of identification markers that appear to have been deliberately altered, as if she wanted to erase who she was and become someone else entirely. This revelation triggered something in Drave's mind, not just a shadow protecting him, but someone with their own purpose, methodically constructing a new identity to move through enemy territory undetected. Sir? Nothing. Drave turned away from the window. I want to see the battle records. Every major engagement I've been involved in for the past 7 years. All available footage, eyewitness accounts, ballistics reports. The intelligence officer frowned. That's thousands of hours of data, sir. Then you'd better get started, Drave said. Focus on anomalies, unexplained phenomena, instances where I or my immediate vicinity was targeted but suffered minimal damage. You think she's connected to those incidents? Drave looked back at the unconscious alien. I think there's more to her than we understand. In his quarters that night, Drave reviewed the first batch of files. Operation Thunderhead, 5 years ago. A routine escort mission that had turned into an ambush. 32 soldiers lost. Drave had emerged without a scratch, despite being at the center of the attack. The official report attributed his survival to tactical awareness and quick response time. But the helmet camera footage told a different story. Frame by frame, Drave watched as enemy fire converged on his position, and then, inexplicably, seemed to miss by millimeters. Not random misses, but precise ones, as if something was deflecting the shots. Or someone. He switched to the next file. The Battle of Carrick Ridge 3 years ago. A brutal 3-day siege that had cost hundreds of lives. Once again, despite being in the thick of combat, Drave had escaped serious injury. The report noted several equipment malfunctions among enemy snipers positioned to target his command post. File after file revealed the same pattern. Mysterious equipment failures, unexplained misses. Enemy combatants found dead with precision kills before they could complete their attacks on his position. Small, almost imperceptible interventions that, when viewed collectively, painted a clear picture. Someone had been protecting him, shadowing his movements, eliminating threats before he even knew they existed, and always in the background of blurry reconnaissance photos or distant surveillance footage, hints of a figure in combat armor, never clear enough to identify, always at the edges of perception, a ghost at his back. Drave leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting. For years, this alien, this enemy soldier, had been his silent guardian. But why? What possible reason could she have for protecting an enemy general? The answer, he suspected, lay behind that sealed visor. She regained consciousness on the 5th day. Drave was there when it happened, having taken to spending his free hours in the observation room. The medical staff had warned him that her injuries were severe, that she might never wake. But he knew better. Something about her resilience, her determination, told him she wasn't finished yet. Her first action upon waking was to reach for her face, fingers seeking the visor that had been removed during surgery. Finding it gone, her entire body tensed, head turning sharply to scan the room until her gaze locked onto the one-way glass, looking directly at him, though she couldn't possibly see through it. "I'm going in," Drave said, ignoring the protests of the medical staff. When he entered her room, she was sitting upright despite her injuries, back rigid, hands folded in her lap. Her face exposed now, revealed features that were both alien and strangely familiar. Angular cheekbones, large eyes with vertical pupils, skin the color of a twilight sky. No hair, but a series of small, ridge-like protrusions along her scalp that might serve a similar sensory function. She watched him enter, without surprise, without fear, as if she'd been expecting him. "You know who I am," Drave said. Not a question, a slight nod, her first acknowledgement. "You've been following me, protecting me, for years." Another nod, more hesitant this time. "Why?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat worked, as if speech was difficult or unfamiliar. Finally, in a voice rough from disuse, she said simply, "Debt." The word hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Drave pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down, studying her face for any clue to this mystery. "We've met before," he guessed. Her gaze dropped to her hands, then lifted again to meet his. The intensity in those alien eyes made him uncomfortable. Not hostile, but deeply personal, as if she knew him in ways no one else did. "Long ago," she confirmed, each word carefully formed. "You would not remember." "Try me." She seemed to consider this, head tilting slightly in a gesture that reminded him of their first encounter in the ruins. "Village," she said at last. "Northern continent, civilian settlement." Drave felt a chill run through him. There had been many villages, many civilian pacification operations in the early days of the war. Operations he'd come to regret deeply as their true nature became clear. Not security measures, but acts of systematic terror. "Which one?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Alaris," she said, and the name struck him like a physical blow. Alaris, a small settlement near what was then the contested border, one of his first commands as a captain. They'd been told it was a rebel stronghold, a base for enemy operations. They'd found nothing but farmers, tradespeople, families. But orders were orders, and Drave had been a different man then. Younger, more rigid, more trusting of command. They'd rounded up the villagers, separated them, begun the interrogations, and found nothing. No weapons caches, no communications equipment, no evidence of enemy activity. He'd reported back, requested new orders. The response had been immediate and chilling. No witnesses. Most of his men had obeyed without question. Drave had gone through the motions, unable to openly defy orders, but looking for any opportunity to mitigate the damage. He deliberately misinterpreted commands, allowed escape attempts that he made sure succeeded, classified some villagers as processed when they'd never been captured at all. And there had been one particular incident. "The storage cellar," he said slowly, memory crystallizing. "A girl hiding among the grain sacks." The alien's eyes widened slightly, surprised that he remembered perhaps. "You were that girl," Drave continued, the impossible truth dawning on him. "You couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. Terrified. I found you during the final sweep." She nodded, the motion almost eager now. "You looked at me," she said, "raised your weapon, then lowered it, told me to run, to not look back." "And you ran," Drave finished. "I marked you as eliminated in the report. I never thought—" He trailed off, the weight of revelation settling over him. "How did you go from that frightened child to this?" Her expression hardened, something fierce and determined replacing the momentary vulnerability. "I followed," she said, "watched, learned your ways, your language, your fighting." "You were a child," Drave protested. "How did you even survive?" "Not important," she dismissed with a wave of her three-fingered hand. "What matters is the debt. You spared me. Life for life. So you, what, enlisted in your military to repay me by keeping me alive?" "Not enlisted," she corrected. "Too young. Rejected. So I took other paths, found teachers, people who could make me stronger, faster, better." Her hand touched her side where Drave knew extensive biomodifications had been performed. "Became what I needed to be." The implication staggered him. This wasn't just a soldier following orders, or even a calculated military strategy. This was a life entirely reforged around a single purpose: his survival. "For 7 years," he said, "you've been shadowing me through a war zone, taking bullets meant for me. Why not just, I don't know, send a message? Tell me who you were." She shook her head. "Words meaningless. Actions matter, and purpose needed to remain hidden. If known, effectiveness compromised." "So what now?" Drave asked. "The debt is more than repaid. You've saved my life dozens of times based on what I pieced together." For the first time, she seemed uncertain, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "Don't know," she admitted. Never planned for capture, for recognition. She met his gaze directly. What happens to me now, General Drave? It was a good question. By all military regulations, she was an enemy combatant, subject to detention and interrogation, regardless of her past actions. High Command would want any intelligence she possessed, would view her as a valuable asset rather than a person. I don't know, he answered honestly, but I'll figure something out. You have my word. The look she gave him was both trusting and skeptical, an expression that seemed to say she believed in him personally while retaining a healthy wariness of the system he represented. Rest, he told her, standing to leave. Heal. We'll talk again. At the door, he paused. Do you have a name? Something I can call you? She hesitated, then replied with a series of sounds his translation implant couldn't process. Her birth name, presumably in her native language. I can't pronounce that, he admitted. The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the shadow of a smile. Soldiers called me Shade, she offered, because they never saw me coming. Shade, Drave repeated. It suited her. Thank you, Shade, for everything. He left then, his mind churning with impossible decisions and the weight of a debt he wasn't sure he could ever repay. That night, Drave dreamed of Alaris, of fire and screams and a blue-skinned child huddled among grain sacks. But this time, the dream shifted, showing him a perspective he'd never considered before. Alaris, 7 years earlier. The child pressed herself deeper into the grain sacks, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. The storage cellar was dark and cool, smelling of earth and dried crops, familiar scents from a life that no longer existed. Outside, the screams had stopped. That was worse somehow. Silence meant it was over. She clutched her mother's orange headscarf, the only thing she'd managed to grab when the soldiers came. Mother had pushed her toward the back door, whispered, "Run," before turning to face the invaders. That was the last time she'd seen any of her family. Heavy footsteps above. They were checking the buildings one last time. She held her breath as the cellar door creaked open, as boots descended the wooden steps. A beam of light swept the darkness, catching dust motes in its harsh glare. Then the light found her. She didn't cry out, didn't beg. What was the point? Instead, she stared up at the figure silhouetted against the cellar entrance. A tall human in combat armor, rifle raised. His face was partly shadowed, but she could see his eyes. Cold at first, then something changed. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Predator and prey, conqueror and conquered, soldier and child. She waited for the flash of his weapon, for pain, for darkness. Instead, he lowered his rifle. "Run," he said, his voice rough but quiet. "Don't look back. Go north into the forest. There are caves. You can hide there until this is over." She didn't move, certain it was a trick. "Go," he hissed more urgently. "Now, before someone else comes." Something in his eyes convinced her. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the orange scarf, and darted past him toward the back entrance to the cellar. At the door, she paused and looked back. He was speaking into his communication device. "Storage clear. No survivors." Their eyes met one last time. She ran. As she disappeared into the gathering darkness, she made a silent vow. She would remember this face, this moment, this unexpected mercy in a day of cruelty. Whatever happened next, she would remember. Drav woke with the dream still vivid in his mind, a new understanding taking root. He'd seen that day only from his own perspective, never considering how it had looked to a terrified child whose world had just ended, how his small act of rebellion had appeared to her, how it had shaped everything that followed. He returned to the medical wing earlier than usual, determined to understand more about this impossible figure who had shaped his fate without his knowledge. "Tell me how you did it," he asked without preamble when he entered her room. "How did someone from Alaris infiltrate our military? How did no one discover you?" Shade studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she gestured for him to sit. "After Alaris," she began, her voice stronger now, "I followed your battalion, learned your patterns." Her expression hardened. "Took dead soldiers' identity chip, modified appearance, pigment suppressants, facial prosthetics, eye coverings." She touched her throat. "And silence. Always silence. For years, you maintained this cover for years? Different units, different names, always arranging transfers to stay near you. A hint of pride crossed her features. Your military sees uniforms, not faces. Weren't you afraid I would recognize you? Something vulnerable flickered across her features. Her gaze grew distant, as if looking into the past. I remember my first day in your unit, she said softly, standing in formation as you walked past, rifle at my shoulder, heart hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Her voice took on a different quality, younger, rawer. It was like being back in that cellar again. Only this time, I wasn't powerless. This time, I had a weapon in my hands. She met his eyes directly. You stopped right in front of me, looked directly at me. I thought, this is it. He'll recognize me now. But I didn't, Drave said, the realization painful. She shook her head. You saw only another soldier. I was invisible in the most visible place possible, right before your eyes. All those years, Drave whispered, the magnitude of her deception, her dedication, overwhelming him. All those years, she agreed. Worth it. She touched her chest, over her heart. When you spared me, made choice. Mercy instead of violence. Small moment for you. Life-changing for me. Her eyes held his, fierce and certain. Wanted your choice to matter, to not be wasted. Wanted to prove mercy has power. So this wasn't just about repaying a debt, Drave realized. No, she agreed. I am living proof that a single moment of compassion creates ripples, changes fates. Her eyes held his with quiet intensity. Your mercy mattered. I wanted to ensure it wasn't wasted. Drave sat back, the weight of her words settling over him. All these years he'd carried the guilt of Alaris, believing his small acts of mercy had been insignificant against the larger atrocities. Now he understood their power. I never knew, he said softly. Not meant to know, Shade replied. My purpose was silent, invisible. Her expression softened slightly. But now you do know, and perhaps this knowledge has purpose too. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of debriefings, strategy sessions, and clandestine visits to the medical wing. Officially, the alien prisoner was being kept alive for intelligence purposes. Unofficially, Drave was piecing together a plan that would likely end his military career, but might just save Shade's life. She recovered quickly, her modified physiology accelerating the healing process. Their conversations lengthened as her strength returned, and her comfort with spoken language grew. Drave learned fragments of her story, the years after Alaris, her training with mercenaries and outcasts, the extensive modifications she'd undergone to make herself the perfect guardian. Didn't you have family? He asked her one evening. Someone looking for you after Alaris? Shade's expression darkened. All at Alaris, she said simply. No one left to search. The guilt that statement evoked was overwhelming. Drave had known intellectually that the pacification operations had destroyed families, entire communities. But facing a living consequence of those actions forced him to confront the reality in ways he'd managed to avoid for years. I'm sorry, he said, the words hopelessly inadequate. She studied him with those penetrating eyes. You changed, she observed. After Alaris. Watched you struggle with orders. Become different commander. Better man. Not good enough, Drave countered. I stayed in the system. Kept following orders. Even when I knew better. Changed what you could, Shade insisted. Saved who you could. Saw this many times. She gestured to her chest over her heart. Here, you are not what they made you. Coming from anyone else, the absolution might have felt hollow. From her, the living embodiment of his greatest regret and perhaps his one meaningful act of rebellion against an unjust system, it carried a weight that left him momentarily speechless. As he was about to respond, the door opened. Lieutenant Kess entered with another soldier, Sergeant Vero, a hard-faced veteran whose scarred features reflected years of brutal combat. Sir, Kess began, the security detail for the prisoner. Patient, Drave corrected automatically. Kess hesitated, then continued. Yes, sir, the security detail. Sergeant Vero had some concerns. Vero stood rigidly at attention, his eyes flickering between Drave and Shade with obvious suspicion. Permission to speak freely, sir? Drave nodded. Go ahead, Sergeant. Sir, with all due respect, I don't understand the situation. Vero's voice was tight with barely restrained emotion. This creature is one of them. The same species that's killed thousands of our people. That killed my brother at Ridge Point last year. I'm aware of your loss, Sergeant. Then why, sir? Varro's control slipped slightly, revealing the anger beneath. Why didn't you finish her off when you had the chance? Why are we treating an enemy combatant like an honored guest? What makes her different from all the others we've eliminated without hesitation? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications about Drave's leadership, about the entire moral framework of their military campaign. It was a question Drave himself had been wrestling with, not just about Shade, but about every enemy soldier he'd ordered killed over the years. Because sometimes, Sergeant, Drave said quietly, we need to remember that our enemies are people, that following orders without question doesn't absolve us of responsibility for our actions. He met Varro's gaze directly. And because she saved my life, multiple times as it turns out. Varro's expression remained skeptical, but something in Drave's words seemed to register. He glanced at Shade, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, watching with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. I'll continue to follow your orders, sir, Varro said finally, but I can't say I understand them. Understanding isn't required, Sergeant, just compliance. Drave softened slightly. For now. After they left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Shade finally broke it. He speaks truth many feel, she observed. Hatred runs deep, on both sides. Yes, Drave agreed, which makes what you did even more remarkable. She tilted her head questioningly. You had every reason to hate me, he explained, to want me dead for what happened at Alaris. Instead, you chose to protect me, to see beyond the uniform to the person beneath. He shook his head in wonder. If you could do that after everything you lost, maybe there's hope for the rest of us too. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. Lieutenant Kess, Drave's adjutant, entered with a tablet in hand and tension evident in every line of his body. Sir, priority communication from High Command. We're mobilizing. Drave took the tablet, scanning the orders with growing concern. Full battalion deployment? What's happened? Enemy forces have broken through the northeastern corridor. They've taken the Vargas outpost and are pushing toward the central command hub. Intel suggests this is their major offensive. They're committing everything they have. The implications were clear. After 8 years of stalemate, the enemy was making a decisive move that could potentially end the war, one way or another. How long do we have? Transports are being prepped now. Departure in 3 hours. Drave nodded. Make sure the troops are ready. Full combat loadout. I'll join you shortly. As the lieutenant left, Drave turned back to Shade, who watched him with an unreadable expression. You heard? She nodded. Final battle approaches. You should be safe here, Drave said. The medical station is well behind our lines. When I return— No, she interrupted, sitting straighter. I go with you. Absolutely not. You're still recovering, and you're technically a prisoner of war? Shade's eyes narrowed. 7 years, she said, her voice suddenly hard. 7 years I guard your back. Now when danger greatest, you would leave me behind? This isn't about my safety anymore. This is exactly about your safety, she cut in. Enemy commits everything. Will throw best assassins, best snipers at command structure. At you. She leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. Need me there. One last time. Drave wanted to argue further, but the determination in her eyes told him it would be futile. And perhaps she was right. If the intelligence was accurate, this would be the most dangerous operation of the entire war. Even if I agreed, he said, how would I explain bringing an enemy combatant to the front lines? For the first time since he'd known her, Shade smiled fully, a predatory expression that reminded him she was, beneath the personal connection they'd formed, a highly trained killer. No need to explain, she said. No one will know I'm there, as always. The Vargas corridor was a nightmare landscape of jagged mountains and narrow valleys, perfect terrain for ambushes and impossible to secure completely. Drave's battalion advanced cautiously, encountering surprisingly little resistance in the early phases of the operation. I don't like it, Drave confided to his command staff as they established the forward operating base. They've committed significant forces to this offensive, but we've barely encountered any resistance. Maybe intelligence was wrong about their strength, suggested one officer. Or maybe they're drawing us in, countered Lieutenant Kess, setting up for something bigger. Drave nodded grimly. Double the perimeter security. I want long-range scouts pushed out another 5 kilometers and continuous aerial surveillance of the surrounding valleys. As the officers dispersed to carry out his orders, Drave found himself scanning the shadowed corners of the command tent, wondering if Shade was near. True to her word, she had disappeared during the transport preparations. He hadn't seen her since, though occasionally he thought he felt a presence, a subtle awareness that he was being watched. Night fell over the mountains, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that seeped through even the best thermal gear. Drave made his rounds, checking on the troops before retiring to his private quarters, a small prefabricated shelter set slightly apart from the main encampment. Inside, he found a small object placed carefully on his field desk, a communication device but not of human manufacture. As he picked it up, it activated, projecting a small holographic display showing the surrounding terrain. Several areas were highlighted in pulsing red. "Sniper positions," came a whisper from the darkest corner of the shelter. Drave didn't startle. On some level, he'd been expecting her. "Shade." She emerged partially from the shadows, still wearing the combat armor she'd been captured in, now repaired and modified to better conceal her alien features. The visor was intact again, hiding her face completely. 15 enemy units, she said, gesturing to the hologram. Surrounding camp. Not regular troops. Special forces. Assassins. Drave studied the marked positions. They formed a perfect circle around the base, with particular concentration near his quarters and the command center. "How did you find them?" "Our scanners haven't detected anything. They're using new technology, adaptive camouflage, heat signature dampeners." She tapped the side of her helmet. "My enhancements can detect." "Barely." "I need to alert the security teams," Drave said, reaching for his comm unit. "Too late," Shade replied, her voice oddly gentle despite the dire warning. "Already in motion. Strike team approaching from North Ridge. 4 minutes at most. Then we evacuate. Get everyone moving south toward—" "Nowhere to go," she interrupted. "All routes covered. This was planned all along. Let your forces advance unchallenged. Isolate command structure. Eliminate leadership." The cold calculation of it was admirable from a tactical perspective. Eliminate the command staff, throw the human forces into disarray, then move in with the main body to clean up the fragmented resistance. "What do you suggest?" Drave asked, already reaching for his combat gear. Shade touched the holographic display, zooming in on the northern approach. "I take North Team. Eliminate before they reach perimeter. You alert base. Prepare for attack from other directions. Alone. There are at least 5 combatants in that group." The tilt of her helmeted head conveyed what her hidden expression couldn't, a mixture of confidence and resignation. "What I do," she said simply. "One last time." Before Drave could protest further, she was gone, slipping through the door like a phantom and disappearing into the night. He cursed under his breath, then activated the base-wide alert system. Within seconds, the quiet camp erupted into controlled chaos as soldiers rushed to battle stations. What followed was a night of blood and fire. The enemy assassins, realizing their approach had been detected, abandoned stealth for overwhelming force. They attacked from all directions, using advanced weapons and tactics that pushed the defenders to their limits. Drave found himself in the thick of the fighting, moving from one hotspot to another, rallying his troops and coordinating the defense. Throughout the night, he caught glimpses of a shadow moving through the battlefield, a figure that appeared and disappeared, leaving dead enemies in its wake before vanishing again. By dawn, the attack had been repelled. The cost was high, 37 dead, over 50 wounded, but the command structure remained intact, and messenger drones reported that the main enemy force was retreating, their carefully orchestrated plan having failed. As the sun rose over the mountains, Drave stood on the northern perimeter, surveying the aftermath. Bodies littered the approaches, enemy special forces in their advanced armor, now still and silent. "General," Lieutenant Kess approached, his face streaked with blood and soot. "Scouts report the enemy is in full retreat across all sectors. Whatever they were planning, it didn't work." "Thanks to advance warning," Drave said. "Have we accounted for all personnel?" "Still doing final checks, but it looks like we found everyone, sir." Kess hesitated. "There is one strange report, though. Several soldiers claim they saw someone fighting alongside us who wasn't part of our unit. Some kind of, I don't know how else to put this, guardian figure." Drave's heart rate quickened. "Descriptions?" "Varies, sir. advanced armor, moved incredibly fast. Some thought it was a new combat drone we were testing. Kess looked uncomfortable. A few are saying it took multiple direct hits and kept fighting, like it couldn't be killed. Or wouldn't stop until its mission was complete, Drave thought. Keep me updated on the search for any missing personnel, he ordered. I'm going to check the northern approach personally. Sir, that area hasn't been fully secured yet. I won't go far, Drave assured him. I just want to see the terrain for myself. Alone, Drave made his way carefully along the northern ridge. The signs of combat were everywhere. Scorched earth from plasma weapons, shattered rocks from ballistic impacts, bloodstains both human red and alien indigo. Indigo. He followed the trail of alien blood, moving further from the base than he'd intended. It led him to a small hollow between two massive boulders, a natural defensive position with clear sight lines to the base and the approaching valley. Shade lay propped against one of the boulders, her armor breached in multiple places, indigo blood pooling beneath her. Her visor was shattered, revealing one side of her face, the skin ashen, the eye dull. No, Drave whispered, rushing to her side. No, no, no. Her eye flickered toward him, recognition bringing a momentary brightness. You? Alive, she managed, her voice barely audible. Mission complete. Save your strength, Drave ordered, already activating his field med kit. I'm calling for extraction. Her three-fingered hand grasped his wrist with surprising strength. Too late, she said. Known. When I came. You knew this was a suicide mission? Drave demanded, anger mixing with grief. Why would you? Worth it, she interrupted. One life. For hundreds. For yours. A wet cough shook her body. Fair trade. Drave worked frantically with the med kit, trying to stabilize her, but even his limited medical knowledge told him the damage was too extensive. Multiple plasma burns had charred through her armor into the flesh beneath. At least 3 major penetrating wounds had torn through critical organs. The fact that she was still conscious at all was a testament to her modifications and her sheer determination. I can't accept that, he said. Not after everything. Not after 7 years. Been your shadow. All these years, she whispered, her gaze growing distant. No regrets. Her breathing became more labored, each exhale carrying a faint whistling sound as air escaped through damaged lungs. With what appeared to be tremendous effort, she reached for something tucked inside her armor, a small, worn piece of orange fabric, frayed at the edges but carefully preserved. She pressed it into his hand. From Elaris, she whispered. Mother's, symbol of home. Kept it all these years. Drave recognized it immediately, a traditional head covering worn by the women of her village. He remembered seeing them as his troops moved through Elaris, bright spots of color against the drab surroundings. This particular shade of orange had been visible in the dim light of that cellar, a flash of color that had caught his attention, revealing the hiding child. With her remaining strength, she gestured toward her face. Take off. The mask, she rasped. And remember who I was. As Drave reached for the damaged helmet, he paused, his hand hovering inches from her face. In that moment, looking into her one clear eye, he suddenly recognized something. A particular expression, a certain quality of determined defiance mixed with vulnerability. It wasn't just her features, it was her essence. I knew it was you, he said softly, before I ever saw your face. I just couldn't believe you'd been there all along. Her eye widened slightly in surprise. That day in the cellar, he continued, you looked at me with that same expression, terrified but refusing to beg for your life. I've seen that look in glimpses throughout the years. Never realizing, he gently removed what remained of her helmet, fully revealing the face he'd only glimpsed in the hospital. Along her left temple was a small, jagged scar, one he remembered seeing on the child in the cellar. Fresh and bleeding then, long healed now. I remember, he promised. I won't forget. A faint smile touched her blue lips. So, you do remember? The question came with unexpected emotion, as if confirming this single point was more important than anything else. More important even than her fading life. Yes, Drave said, gripping her hand tighter. I remember the cellar, the orange scarf, the way you looked at me then, just like now. Relief flooded her expression. Needed you to know. All this time wasn't just following a stranger. Her breathing grew more labored. Protected the man who saw me as person. Ilara's child becomes your guardian. Strange path, yes? Very strange, Drave agreed, trying to return the smile despite the tightness in his throat. But I'm grateful for every step of it. Was it enough? She asked, her voice fading to barely a whisper. Did I balance scales? Does your mercy still have meaning? Drave took her hand in his, squeezing gently. More than enough, he assured her, but it was never about debt. You've proven something far more important, that a single act of compassion can change everything. You didn't just save my life. You've shown that mercy matters. Her eyes brightened slightly. I wanted, your choice not to remain. Just random gesture. I am proof that kindness changes destinies. She seemed satisfied with this, her body relaxing slightly. Tell them, she murmured, about Ilaris, about others like me. Make it matter. I will, Drave promised. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Her lips moved again, forming words too faint to hear. Drave leaned closer. What we do echoes, she breathed. Your mercy echoed. Remember this. Those were her final words. Her body shuddered once, then grew still, the light fading from her eyes as Drave held her. For a long time he remained there, cradling her body as the sun climbed higher in the alien sky. When he finally stood, his decision was already made. 3 months later, Carson Drave, no longer a general, stood before a simple stone monument on a green hillside overlooking the capital city. The war was over, not through decisive victory, but through exhausted compromise. The peace talks had begun within weeks of the failed assassination attempt, both sides finally acknowledging that neither could win through force alone. Drave had played his part in the negotiations, then submitted his resignation as soon as the accords were signed. He'd had enough of war, enough of following orders he didn't believe in. There were other ways to serve, other paths to redemption. The news of his resignation had shocked the military establishment. More shocking still was the report he'd submitted to both human authorities and alien representatives, a detailed account of Ilaris and similar operations, with no attempt to minimize his own complicity. Some former comrades now viewed him as a traitor. Others, like Lieutenant Kess, had followed his example, speaking out about their own experiences. You sure about this? Kess had asked him the day before the monument's unveiling. Going public with her story? She deserves to be remembered, Drave had replied. Not as a nameless enemy, but as someone who showed more humanity than most of us managed during the entire war. Now the monument stood completed, a rectangular column of dark stone with a single phrase carved into its face in both human and alien. Script. Ekate. To the unseen. No explanation, no names. Those who needed to understand would, and those who didn't would perhaps pause to wonder about the meaning, which was, in its way, the beginning of understanding. At the base of the monument rested a worn piece of combat armor, a chest plate scarred by countless impacts, repaired many times by dedicated hands. Once it had protected a silent guardian as she stood between danger and the man she had chosen to protect. Now it stood as a quiet reminder of sacrifice and unexpected grace. Every morning before sunrise, Drave came to this place. Sometimes he spoke to her as if she could hear. Sometimes he simply stood in silence, watching the city come to life below. And sometimes, like today, he brought news. The Truth Commission begins next week, he said to the monument. They've asked me to testify about Ilaris, about the other pacification operations. It won't be easy, but it's necessary. He paused. You were right about the echoes. Every action ripples outward, touching lives we never see. Your protection of me has led to this moment of reckoning, a potential healing between our peoples. A cool breeze stirred the grass around the monument, carrying the scent of coming rain. I'll never know all the bullets you took for me, Drave continued, all the times you saved my life without my knowledge. But I carry the weight of that gift every day. He touched the chest plate gently. And I promise to make it matter. He paused, remembering her words in those final moments. You were right. You weren't just protecting me out of gratitude. You were proving that mercy has power, that compassion creates ripples we can't foresee. One life spared became hundreds saved. I won't forget that lesson. In the distance, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the hillside. Drave stood a moment longer in silent communion with memory, then turned and walked back toward the city, where the difficult work of peace awaited. He didn't see the young journalist who had followed him at a respectful distance, capturing images of the monument and the worn chest plate. He didn't know that by nightfall, images of the unseen would begin circulating across information networks, accompanied by fragments of a story too powerful to remain hidden. An enemy soldier who had protected a human general for years, all because of one act of mercy. Within days, others came forward. Soldiers who had glimpsed the mysterious guardian on battlefields, medics who had treated the blue-skinned prisoner, officials who had been present during the peace negotiations. The story grew, evolved, became something larger than Drave, or even Shade herself. It became a symbol. In a war built on division and dehumanization, the tale of the alien guardian cut through propaganda and hatred. People on both sides began asking questions about Alaris, about other villages, about the nature of the conflict itself. Historians started examining records, journalists investigated classified operations, citizens demanded transparency. Drave received hundreds of messages, some supportive, others accusatory, many simply seeking confirmation. He responded to none of them, but continued his daily pilgrimage to the monument, where visitors now left their own tokens alongside the chest plate. Small orange squares of fabric had become particularly common, a symbol whose meaning was understood without explanation. 6 months after the monument's creation, Drave arrived one morning to find not only the usual visitors, but a familiar scarred face. Sergeant Vero, now wearing civilian clothes, stood at a respectful distance from the monument. In his hand was a smooth, dark stone. As Drave approached, Vero straightened, old military habits reasserting themselves before he consciously relaxed. "General," he acknowledged. "Or just sir now, I suppose." "Just Drave is fine," Drave corrected gently. "It's good to see you, Vero." The former sergeant's gaze returned to the monument, to the chest plate at its base, now surrounded by tokens left by countless visitors. "I've been following the story," he said. "About her, about Alaris." His voice roughened. "About all of it. And I didn't want to believe it at first." Vero's scarred fingers tightened around the stone he held. Easier to keep thinking of them as just the enemy, faceless, deserving whatever we did to them. He shook his head. "But she wasn't faceless to you, was she? Not even that first time in Alaris." "No," Drave admitted, "though I wish I'd seen more clearly, much sooner." Vero nodded, understanding in his eyes that hadn't been there during their confrontation in the hospital room. "I keep thinking about what you said that day, about remembering our enemies are people." He stepped forward and carefully placed his stone beside the chest plate. "My brother, I think he would have understood this better than I did. He always saw people, not just uniforms." As Vero stepped back, Drave noted the symbol etched into the stone, the insignia of their old battalion, but modified, intertwined with what appeared to be an Alaris community marker. "You're not the only one," Vero said, gesturing to the growing collection of tokens. "A lot of former soldiers coming here now, thinking about what it all meant, what we did, what she did." He met Drave's eyes again. "Changes a man's perspective, knowing an enemy saved his commander because of one act of mercy." After Vero left, Drave remained at the monument, watching as people came and went, humans and aliens alike, some leaving tokens, others simply standing, in silent reflection. "They call me a hero," he said quietly to the monument, to the memory it represented, "for the peace accords, for speaking the truth about Alaris, for building this place." He touched the worn chest plate, "But the real hero died in my arms, and I never knew who she was, until it was too late." The morning breeze stirred the small orange fabric tokens left by visitors, making them flutter like so many silent witnesses. "I couldn't save you," Drave continued, "but maybe through your story, we can save something more important. Maybe we can finally learn to see each other, not as enemies, but as people capable of both terrible cruelty and unexpected grace." Behind him, the stone sentinel stood against the brightening sky, a reminder of the guardians who move through our lives, unseen, and of mercy's power to echo across years, across battlefields, across the vast distances between different worlds and different hearts. No longer just one man's private memorial, the unseen had become a place of pilgrimage, a catalyst for change, a symbol of what might be possible when compassion outlives conflict, a testament to a silent guardian whose final gift was breaking her silence.